Hey, welcome. So, when you think about where the smartphone came from, what's the first image that pops into your head? For pretty much all of us, it's one guy on one stage holding up a device that completely changed the world. But what if I told you that whole origin story, the one we all know by heart, is missing its first and maybe most important chapter? Let's dig into the real story, starting with the myth we all fell for.
Right. So, the history of mobile tech that we all know is a pretty straight line. You had those early brick phones, then the cool flip phones, then the Blackberries that we all got hooked on, and then, bam, the Big Bang, the moment that changed everything.
Yeah, that date, it's iconic, isn't it? Steve Jobs strolls onto a stage in San Francisco, and in that moment, he basically cemented the whole idea of the lone genius inventor. The air is just electric. He's about to show us something that he claims will reinvent the entire idea of a phone.
And with those words, the iPhone is revealed, and the world is never, ever the same. That's the legend, right? It's dramatic, it's clean, and it has a hero. It's also not quite right.
That's the big question. What if the core ideas, the touchscreen, the apps, that all-in-one gadget in your pocket, what if they didn't start in 2007, but way, way back in 1994? It kind of forces us to ask a whole different question. Who is the real pioneer here?
All right, so let's hop in the time machine. We're going back before iPhones, before Blackberries even, to meet a device that was so ridiculously ahead of its time that history just kind of forgot about it. Its name was Simon.
Just look at this thing, the IBM Simon Personal Communicator. It weighed over a pound, was literally shaped like a brick, and it hit the shelves in 1994. Now, it was a cell phone, sure, but it was so much more. This was basically a computer in your hand more than a decade before the iPhone even existed.
And here's a crazy little fact for you. IBM never actually called this a smartphone. Why? Because the word literally hadn't been invented yet. But think about it. What else do you call a gadget that smashes a phone together with a computer? Even if they didn't have the word for it, that's exactly what they built.
Okay, so what could this futuristic brick actually do? This is where the story just gets unbelievable. Seriously, the feature list from 1994 reads like a spec sheet from, 2005.
Just look at this list. It was your phone, your pager, and your fax machine. It had email, a calendar, a notepad. You could even sketch on the screen with a stylus and then fax your masterpiece to someone. And get this, it could run third-party apps and even had a version of predictive text. I have to say it again. This was in 1994.
And this comparison just illustrates how visionary it was. The Simon's touchscreen was actually bigger than the screen on the first iPhone. And its whole user interface? It was built around a grid of icons that you tap to open apps. Sound familiar? Yeah, it should.
I mean, try to imagine using this in '94. You tap an icon for your address book, tap a friend's name, and then choose what to do. Call, page, or email them. This entire workflow, this thing we do 100 times a day now without even thinking about it, was basically invented right here by the Simon.
So, this leads to the obvious question, right? If this device was such a game changer, why have most of us never even heard of it? Why didn't it take over the world? Well, it turns out that being first isn't always the same as being successful.
The first major hurdle? The price tag. Back in 1994, with a 2-year contract, the Simon would set you back a staggering $1,099. That was a mind-boggling amount of money back then.
And just to put that in perspective, in today's money, that's almost $2,300. Yeah, this wasn't a phone for everybody. This was a high-powered piece of gear for executives, a true luxury item.
And that insane price was just one of 4 massive deal breakers. The data networks at the time were painfully slow and super spotty. The battery life was, well, it was awful. We're talking less than an hour of talk time. And maybe the biggest problem of all was just timing. The world wasn't ready. The culture, the internet, none of the infrastructure to support a true smartphone was in place yet.
In this chart, man, it says it all. Only about 50,000 of these were ever made. And it was yanked from the market after just 6 months. Commercially, it was a total failure. But its story doesn't end there, not by a long shot.
Because even though the Simon itself vanished, its ideas, they lived on. It became a kind of ghost in the machine, its DNA getting passed down to every single smartphone that came after it, usually without anyone even knowing where it came from.
You can literally see its influence ripple through the years on this timeline. Simon brought us the touchscreen and an on-screen keyboard in '94. Then the Palm Pilot made handwriting recognition popular a couple years later. BlackBerry got famous for its physical keyboard, but Simon had a predictive on-screen one 5 years earlier. And the entire App Store model we live by today? It's the ultimate evolution of Simon's idea for third-party apps.
Frank Canova, who was the lead engineer on the Simon project, he summed it up perfectly. He said, "We had to create the category before we could sell the product." They weren't just building a new phone, they were inventing a whole new thing. The world just needed about a decade to catch up to what they'd built.
So, what's the big takeaway from all this? Well, history loves a simple story, right? A lone genius on a stage pulling a perfect product out of thin air. But the real story of innovation is almost always messier, it starts earlier, and it's way more collaborative. It starts with engineers sitting around a conference room table, sketching out a future that nobody else can see yet.
And that just leaves us with a really fascinating question to think about. The Simon was a failure in 1994, but its ideas basically define our world today. So what's the Simon of our time? What revolutionary tech is out there right now, struggling, maybe even failing, just waiting for the rest of the world to finally catch up?